Okay, let's continue putting more tests for the missing fields. I'm gonna do another one that's very similar, and this one is about missing username. And in this case, we're passing the password, but not the username. And so we should get the same error. Please enter username and password. Now let's run the test again, and it passes. Perfect. Okay, the last test that I'm gonna write is gonna be checking that if a user registers and you try to register another user with the same username, that fails. So let's do that. Okay, so we're gonna mark the test as asyncio as the other ones. We're gonna name this test existing user registration with the fixtures create test client and create all. And then we're gonna hit the register endpoint with the user dict form that we had before, and then get the body of the data and assert that the username already exists error appears. Now, think about it for a second, and is this test gonna pass or fail? What do you think? So let's try it out. Okay, it says that it fails, and it says assertion error. That means that it didn't find the username already exists string in there. And it's important to understand why this is happening. So one thing that you have to remember is that all these fixtures that we have in here, by default, they're function scoped. So a scope is something that if you pass here like scope equals, and you can pass like function or module or different scopes, so that the fixture is sort of like applicable to that layer or level of the test itself. But by default, Pytest fixtures are function scoped. So that means that every time we start a new ones of this async def, that means that the database is destroyed, and then the database is created again when we call it again. And the way to see this is if you run Pytest on the terminal, you'll see that we have these echoes or print statements in the conf test to like make sure that we see what where these things are at, and we pass a -s flag to print those out. So if I do Pytest here, see how it says destroying DB, creating DB, creating test tables, creating test client, creating models, destroying DB, creating DB. So it's doing it every time that we have a new function. So that's important to understand when you're creating tests, because that means that every time you start with a new async def here, you are essentially starting with a brand new database. And that's a good thing because you want to be able to test things on isolation. There are other times when you want to conserve the data. So in that case, you would set these fixtures with a specific scope. So you could say scope module, for example, and then that's a module based fixture. So that means that it's only called once per module, and so on. So go to the Pytest fixtures documentation to learn a little bit more about scopes. And that's a tool that you should have and understand. But so for us to, for this test to fail, we would have to call this redirect or this create register twice. So we're going to add a create user for the first time, and then create the same user a second time. And so now if we run this test, perfect, we see that it passes the test.